Welcome to Chapter 3 of the Legal Studies program, focusing on the history of U.S. immigration policy. Our learning objectives are to describe the major eras and key laws that have shaped modern immigration policy. We will explain how historical attitudes influenced restrictions and how past policies affect the immigration court today. This video will cover several key terms and acts, spanning from the Naturalization Act of 1790 to the Illegal Immigration Reform Act of 1996. These historical milestones define the legal evolution of U.S. immigration. Section 1 covers the early immigration policy from 1790 to 1882. The Naturalization Act of 1790 was the first U.S. law limiting naturalization to free white persons. During the open borders era that followed, millions arrived from Europe, regulated mainly by individual states. Section 2 marks a period of exclusion and restriction from 1882 to 1924. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first major federal restriction, banning Chinese laborers. The Ellis Island era introduced the concept of admissibility, screening 12 million immigrants for health, criminal history, and economic stability. Section 3, spanning 1924 to 1965, established the National Origins Quota System. The Immigration Act of 1924 created strict quotas that favored Northern and Western Europe and restricted immigration from Asia and Africa. Crucially, it established the U.S. Border Patrol to enforce boundaries. The modern era began in 1965. The Immigration and Nationality Act abolished national origin quotas, creating today's family-based and employment-based immigration structure. This landmark law increased immigration from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and remains the basic structure of U.S. policy. Section 5 covers refugee protections from 1980 to 1990. The Refugee Act of 1980 established the first permanent and systematic procedure for admitting refugees. It created the modern asylum system and adopted the international definition of a refugee. This is one of the most important humanitarian laws in U.S. history. Section 6, from 1986 to 1996, saw an expansion of enforcement and legal reform. IRCA provided amnesty for millions while increasing border enforcement. IIRIRA expanded deportation grounds, limited judicial review, and created expedited removal, procedures that still define the enforcement landscape today. Section 7 covers the post-2001 security era. The shift toward national security led to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security and increased border security. This era expanded detention, introduced new asylum restrictions, and heightened scrutiny of certain nationalities. These policies continue to influence immigration court today. Modern immigration court procedures are built on a cumulative legal history. They incorporate early concepts of admissibility, 20th century quota and enforcement systems, the 1965 family-based structure, the 1980 asylum framework, and post-2001 security priorities. Understanding this history is key to understanding the court's current operation. Here are some critical thinking questions to review the material. Consider how early laws reflected attitudes about race, why the 1965 Act was a turning point, how the 1996 laws changed court procedures, and how historical policy still influences modern debates. For assessment, recall the purpose of the Chinese Exclusion Act. What major change did the 1965 Act make? Name one impact of IIRIRA from 1996, and identify the law that created the modern asylum system. Finally, we introduce Case 3 in the matter of Li Wei. Li Wei is a 19-year-old student from China, seeking asylum in the immigration court in Del Rio, Texas. He fled following a raid on a Christian youth group. The government alleges his motivation is to circumvent immigration laws. Li Wei was apprehended in June 2024 at UT El Paso. The case involves both defense and government witnesses, including professors from Sul Ross State University and a government expert on Chinese espionage. This case requires applying the asylum and protection frameworks we've discussed. Case 3 involves a critical debate between the defense and government arguments. The defense claims fear is well-founded, citing expert testimony on the systematic repression of house churches. The government counters that the actions were neutral land use enforcement, suggesting economic motives and security risks. The defense summarizes the credibility of persecution by highlighting the 2024 raid as part of a systematic dismantling of unregistered churches. Academic testimony confirms the applicant's character and the veracity of the trauma experienced. The defense argues that the fear is objectively reasonable under the matter of Mogherabi standard. The conclusion synthesizes the legal issues around balancing security and asylum. The defense argues persecution targets religious identity, while the government characterizes actions as administrative. Given the evidence, the video concludes that the respondent has met the burden of a well-founded fear. To remove him would be to ignore his documented history as a target.